My name is Soraya, and you are listening to Wild Roots. In this episode, we welcome back psychologist and author Dr. Darcia Narvaez to discuss a sustainable worldview taught by our very own ancestors and by those who continue to flourish by this indigenous wisdom today. Dr. Darcia Narvaez is a professor in the Department of Psychology at the University of Notre Dame. She has been studying the evolved nest, which is what we primarily focused on in our previous discussion. Her studies focus on how the evolved nest influences human well-being, sociality, and morality.
The nest builds the brain of the human being in the proper way. And we can't be human without that. But we forgot in the West, which is all about money making now, right? And dominance, very dominance orientation rather than partnership orientation.
To embody this most sustainable, life-nurturing wisdom, Darcia explains that it is the Western ego that needs to be transformed by embracing partnerships with one another in nature and let human domination fall away.
Our embodied understanding that we develop about how to move through life based on our lived experience. Our duty is to clear our egos out of the way and let those divine energies, those universal energies of spirit, touch us and guide our uniqueness, our path to doing what we can to promote life.
So join us as we reorient ourselves towards that path of greater understanding and to reestablish that root wisdom. It may be what all of life depends upon. In our last discussion, you described this primal nest, this developmental niche, or as you've called it, the evolved nest, and how our unnestedness has become a cause of humanity's abnormal behaviors in regard to the natural world and to each other. And we'll get back to that point later on, but in our discussion, we're going to be focusing on different worldview psychologies, which is definitely related. But first of all, there's a strange thing that's happened. Humans have essentially divorced themselves from nature and the natural world to allow for, quote, human progress. But an indigenous worldview wouldn't see this as progress at all, but rather a devolution of progress. Basically, to forget one's roots and to forget our interconnectedness with nature and each other is considered a disastrous worldview. So we're going to be talking about what's missing in Western psychologies, from the way we simply regard nature to how we heal ourselves and treat our fellow living beings in which we share this world. So first of all, Darcia, could you describe what it means to study indigenous worldviews, what indigenous psychologies are and what they mean?
Yeah, so thanks, Soraya, for having me again, and it's wonderful to be with you. Your spirit is magnanimous and sensitive, and I really appreciate having a chance to chat.
Thank you.
Well, I have stumbled into indigenous worldviews. Worldview, actually, it's pretty basic. Robert Redfield, some decades ago, pointed out he called them primitive at the time. But he said there really are two worldviews. One, the indigenous, the long-standing, the most widespread through human existence is the indigenous view, which sees the world as a sacred, moral, connected, enchanted place. And humans are just part of that place, as one of many persons, one type of person, living being. And the other type of worldview is the fragmented, disenchanted, amoral perspective of what the world is like. And that's what the Western world has promoted for some hundreds of years, especially. And so you can see that in the type of capitalism that's dominating, the way people treat the natural world and anything in the way of humans being dominant. Right. So that's a weird worldview from the perspective of humanity, and certainly is not a sustainable worldview.
Right. So you talked in one of your blogs recently on Psychology Today about some African tribes that have a definition of what it means to be a full human being, and that is that the person respects their own humanity, respects their own humanness through things like gentleness, hospitality, and generosity. Basically, these are unifying qualities, whereas today people often define themselves or each other in a very divisive sort of way. It's very alienating, and in these tribes, connecting even to beyond their human selves or other human beings, but also to like the elements in the world that they're part of is part of that overall view, and that's something that definitely Westernized society doesn't have. And so, just coming across your work made me realize how much I really like psychology, and as a biologist, even more so, because I see the world as a living, breathing thing, as one, and so psychological theories of today, though, have sort of like fallen short, and this is what I want you to kind of explain is psychological theories focus on what's called weird psychology, and I'll let you describe that acronym. And it's a study where, psychology largely draws their conclusions from. So can you explain why it's important to acknowledge this, and what is basically being left out first, I guess, by explaining what weird psychology is?
Sure. So weird, capital weird, represents the type of people that are usually studied by psychology research and assumed and generalized from whatever they find with this kind of group of people. And it stands for Western, European related, so that includes the United States, industrialized, rich, and democratic, at least to some degree. U.S. really isn't democratic anymore. Mm-hmm. But then that represents 12%. At the time this was published in 2010, a study, or an essay reviewing research and how weird samples were predominant in the psychological published research. At that time, it was 12% of the world population. But then, even worse, most of the studies were about undergraduates in college in the United States or Europe, typically the US or Canada, and that's only 4%.
That's a poor sample.
I think it's 2%, mm-hmm. 2 or 4% of the world's population, and they're making generalizations about human nature from those samples, as if, anything they find in the lab, even that's a problem, but then with the particular sample of people. So what's problematic with that, of course, is that it's not only these weird people who have this strange Western fragmented worldview, which we mentioned, and I could say more about that. Mm-hmm. They're also unnested, and we talked about the nest in our previous conversation. The nest builds the brain of the human being in the proper way, and these weird folks are not nested. We could say they're unnested as well as weird. And so you're making generalizations about people who are raised sort of like in the cages of Harry Harlow. Mm-hmm. He raised monkeys accidentally and then did systematic experiments on separated infant monkeys from their mothers and see what they were like when they became adults. They're malfunctioning. They couldn't even get along with anybody, and are autistic and aggressive and all this. But we're doing the same thing to our children, especially in the U.S., where there's very few supports for raising children. So the nest includes, as I had said before, breastfeeding, soothing perinatal experience, so soothing pregnancy and birth and after birth, responsiveness to the needs of the child, so that you're keeping babies optimally aroused, lots of affection, pretty much carrying a baby, keeping them next to you physically or on you all through that first 18 months when they're more like fetuses of other animals. Multiple adult caregivers, so allo mothers, they're called in anthropology. Positive climate and social support for mom and baby. That village of care really is there. And play, self-directed play with multiple age playmates in the natural world. So building connections with, and your brain is developing through all these things. We have all this neuroscience for all these components now showing how important they are. But the play with multiple age playmates helps you grow your executive functions, your social skills, leadership skills, your social emotional intelligence. And then in the natural world, having that nature connection, spending your childhood in the wild nature is going to really embed you and root you on in the earth community.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, we've now added in one more thing to the nest, and we call it healing practices. Since we're human, we make bad choices sometimes, and so we need to have various healing practices like trance dancing and singing and all sorts of calming and community building activities. So those nest components are all pretty much missing in USA kids development. And so you end up with these people who are half empty. They have no inner sense of connection to people or to the natural world. And then they are ready to be filled with some ideology that they get in school or from elsewhere, telling them what they should think and do, and they have nothing to make judgments on of their own self, and they're at the same time feeling very ashamed because their needs were not met, they were shut down, they can't develop themselves, their full spirited, unique giftedness can't develop, and so they have all these struggles internal, and the frustration gets expressed out towards others, towards outgroups right now in the US, immigrants and minorities, and anyway,
Yeah,
it's
everybody's
really
feeling.
quite a mess.
Everybody's feeling this unnestedness. It's just
Yeah.
kind of rampant right now, actually.
Yes.
So basically, the the psychological theories aren't universal. I mean, they can't be, because they've eliminated so many qualities that humans have used to understand their world for tens of thousands of years, so much longer than this tiny fragment of time of westernized humanity. It's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So on one of your blogs, you also talked about the key differences between typical Western psychological theories versus indigenous psychologies. Could you talk a little bit about those key differences? I guess you kind of already did, but...
Well, I can mention a few. I don't remember what I put in that blog, but certainly there's a deeper understanding. And let me just clarify that we're talking about small band hunter-gatherers. So these are band communities, not tribes. Tribes is a more complex, can be hierarchical. But bands are egalitarian, fiercely egalitarian, and cooperative and nomadic. And the band membership keeps shifting day to day. And so those, because you're raised to be rooted in the earth, you are able to leave and come and go out of human communities because the whole place is your community, the whole natural world, right? And your senses and your perceptions are well developed for paying attention to when you smell a predator that's hungry nearby or when that's not hungry. And you have all these things that have been nurtured through positive support and allowing you to grow in a way that's kind of deeply empathic with others, including other than humans, and having a sense of autonomy and responsibility. You're not going to go out and start killing things for fun. I mean, that's just not even a part of the psychology. So there's a whole different kind of intelligence that develops in these communities, what I call receptive intelligence, which is your ability to actually perceive the communications among the other than human entities around you. We've lost that when we spend our days inside of walls and inside of, or even outside in very domesticated plant life and animal life, right? It's so different. And so that nature connection just is I mean, now I work with my students, just, take your earbuds out and walk across campus and listen to the
Listen
birds. And
to
they're
the
just amazed,
birds.
oh, there are birds around here. Really? Wow. Oh, and
Yeah.
smell something. And oh, listen to the wind in the leaves. It's like,
It's
wow.
our
Yeah.
humanity.
Right. We can't be human without that.
Mm-hmm.
So, but we forgot in the West, which is all about money making now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And dominance, very dominance orientation rather than partnership orientation.
So I mean,
So there's a lot of different things. Yeah.
right. So you already kind of covered it, but like, I mean, clearly we can see how damaging this Western way of thinking has been, and actually leading to global ecological disaster. So with that, with our way of thinking based upon such skewed like theories, how does this affect our ability, to connect with nature and each other? I mean, we totally have been fed this wrong way to live. It's very strange.
It's not just the thinking part. It's not just the cognitive aspect that sort of the worldview kind of emphasizes. It's what's in our bodies. It's our embodied understanding that we develop about how to move through life uh, based on our lived experience. So
Yeah.
if you in the small band hunter gatherer communities in our ancestral context, you're with others all the time. You're carried, you're uh, rocked, you're talked to, you're sung to, you sing, you're with a group, and it's just this, compared to what we have now, paradise of how to grow up, which then builds your brain appropriately. So you're kept in an optimal arousal condition while your brain is very rapidly finishing up its systems about how's the stress response going to work. That's decided in those first couple years. How is you're going to have an oxytocin system that works well? Are you
Mm.
going to have a vagus nerve that works well, which keeps your health and your well-being coordinated throughout your whole body? All that's dependent on having a nurturing environment, this in arms kind of lifestyle that our band history and our band cousins provide. And without that, what happens? Your stress response system gets all messed up because you're put in a carrier, a playpen, a daycare with strangers, and they're not responding to you. They're not
Yeah.
carrying you around. They're not keeping you in the optimal arousal condition. So your stress response, your vagus nerve, your oxytocin system, if you're neglected a lot, not touched very much, if you're left to cry, the cortisol is going to melt synapses, the connections among
Mm-hmm. It's
neurons. I mean, what
insane.
kind of brain are you going to have? What kind of sense of
Mm-hmm.
living life would you have? Not much. So you're
No.
going to be a little kind of robot or an empty vessel. That's what, people who want to control and dominate you, they like that. They want to tell you and boss you around. And so you respond, you submit, you become subservient to authoritarianism, which we see in the US now, especially. It's always been there because we've had this massive problem with how we came about as a country, slavery and genocide. So,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's truly roboticized humans, which is why I'm like so adamant about stressing that we need to feel more genuinely connected to nature, especially. You mentioned in our last discussion that indigenous peoples don't have the need to strive to feel connected to nature or the world or each other, or to feel that they have to find some spiritual path or practice, that these things come naturally to them. Whereas in westernized wisdom, there's, you know, everybody's always on this great quest to be fulfilled by something outside of themselves. And to me, this is directly a result of our lack of connecting to nature. So somehow in westernized society, something is missing, yet nothing is missing because we are nature.
well, I think what's missing are the skills and the perception and the attention in the right way to be connected.
Oh, yeah.
So there's that was supposed to, all sorts of layers of those things were supposed to develop through our childhood, and that's all missing. And so then here you have an adult, you go out in the natural world or the wild nature and you've never done it before, you're going to be scared to death because you don't know what that sound means. What's that shadow? Or, on and on. And you don't know how to take care of yourself. And that's because you haven't had the right upbringing to help you become an earth-centered creature. And so it takes a lot of work then as an adult to get back to being calm when you're out in nature. I mean, that's the first thing, right? So work on that with my students. And one time when I had the opportunity, after couple months of practicing calmness and attention to the natural sounds and everything, we went to a state park that had a lot of semi-wilderness, and they had 4 hours to wander around on their own and see what happened, and not be controlled with a schedule and all this stuff. And that was transformative for many of them because they had never done that before. And and that's just 4 hours. I mean, you spend 3 days doing that or a week. It's amazing. But you have to have some skills to do it for more than a few hours. And so we didn't have time to develop all that.
Right. Okay, so we talked a lot about the developmental consequences of unnestedness. How can people regain or establish that sense of security if perhaps they were not nested properly? What can the unnested do to regain that loss?
Yeah, it's probably going to be different for each person because the trauma or undercare that occurred probably happened at different time points for your development, and so different things are missing, and you have different gifts. Your uniqueness has your unique spirit has different pathways that it intended to take. So what works for each person will vary, but I think certainly you have to start to realize that the kind of assumptions that what C.A. Bowers calls root metaphors of the West, there's something wrong with them. So there's dualism, that you can separate mind from body, human from nature, or individualism, which is very destructive because it's false, right? And it puts all the responsibility on the individual to save themselves or whatever. It's all your fault when you're poor or something. And the idea of linear progress, which you mentioned before, or the superiority of human beings, right? Rather than the great book by easy to read book. Well, it's hard to read actually emotionally, but easy, well written, by Derek Jensen, The Myth of Human Supremacy. He goes through all the intelligences of all these different creatures, and it's like, oh my God, how do we think we're smarter? We can't do that, glow in the dark or something. And then one of the key ones that's a problem, I think, in developmental psychology, I find, is people think you need an experiment to know anything. So if there's no experiment, if you can't point to a data that's been published, some publication, then how do I know it's true? So then they use that kind of framework for saying things like, well, they did this 3-month experiment with breastfeeding versus infant formula. They looked at this one variable. They found no difference. And so, formula is just as good as breast milk. It's like, what? 30 million year old, tailored to the body, the baby's specific needs at the time. I mean, this is insane. But that's the kind of insanity that's governing us at the moment. So you have to, in a way, step away from a whole bunch of root metaphors that are undermining your actually development of your own intuition about how to live. You have to get back to really understanding yourself. And Abraham Maslow talked about this in How to Self-Actualize, and I wrote about this in some blogs. But you have to start to attend to what flavors you like. Does that taste good to you? Does this feel right? And you have to redevelop that connection to your inner lived being. It's a very smart body you have. At least it was initially ready to get really smart. But then if you were shut down for whatever reason by authoritarian parents or coercion at school or suppression of your intuitions about other creatures or the world, being alive, all that stuff starts to suppress, and you start to kind of cut it out of your sensibilities, right? You stop listening to yourself. So you have to get back to listening to yourself. And sometimes that looks pretty selfish, I think, especially for an adult to do that. But you really have to go through that. You have to kind of almost redevelop yourself, reparent yourself with experiences. And then once you start to build some self confidence in believing in your own intuitions, then you have to have the courage to follow them, which means probably drop out of the ladder, success oriented lifestyle.
Consumer culture,
Wanting more. Yeah,
junk
and
culture.
wanting more than
Mm-hmm.
everyone. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so, and then after that, it's developing your connections, right? Your social capacities of connecting. And then you have to get social pleasure from being with others. After you've calmed yourself down, then you develop social joy and connections to do that, and nature connection. And then you develop part of that is that what I call communal imagination, realizing that you are one with everything. It's an illusion that there's
Yeah.
separation. It's an illusion that you can be better than someone else. You are unique. You have your own path, and we're all connected, and we all have our paths, but they all join.
Mm-hmm. And there's a hurdle to overcoming this sort of disconnect or non-intuitive self, because, like you said, your students might be scared of every little noise because they don't know what it is, and everything's a danger because it's unfamiliar at that time. It shouldn't be unfamiliar to us as human animals, but for them, it's a frightful experience maybe initially, and then once you overcome that, then you can be out in nature and gain that sense of like serenity that you get from nature, and just realize, yes, yeah, that's the intuition at work. That's the intuition realizing that this is good. This connectedness is good for you.
Yes, we read excerpts from Tamarack Song, and I don't know if his book is called Becoming Nature,
Mm.
and he talks about the animal mind and nature speak. And so the students are just like, "What? I've never heard this in any of my other classes in my 12 years of study.
I
What
would
are you
have
talking?"
loved to have taken your class.
But then once they're out and about, they start to understand, they start to unpack, because there's so much in beta, what I call beta brain. They're just in planning mode, get this done, check that off. It's like exhausting, right,
It
to be a
is.
student today. And so then they start to let go and go into alpha brainwave state, which is that relaxed kind of trance state, that you dreamy kind of state that you can get into when you're out in the forest, just watching everything. That's just so marvelous and healing. But you have to be, that's very right brain, right hemisphere more kind of functioning, that also is undermined without the nest, because a lot of the right hemisphere's capacities grow in those first years. But one of the pieces that is hard for Westerners to deal with is ambiguity. To just be okay with not understanding something,
Mm-hmm.
be okay with mystery, to be okay with, just being and not knowing what it is, but you're happy,
Right,
right?
right. That
There.
mysterious sense that makes you feel good or draws your attention. You don't have to define it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
yeah. So, I was recently reading Maxwell Maltz's Psycho-Cybernetics. It's incredible because it goes back to us always wanting something concrete outside of ourselves and not realizing it's all inside. It's all here. It's here already.
Right.
And
Yes.
to the nest part, he brought up that it is not only the child who is taught about love, but the child who has experienced love that grows into a healthy, happy, well-adjusted adult. And I'm like, whoa, that's the
Right.
nest.
That's right.
He just totally talked about the evolved nest right there.
Mhm.
So,
Yes, you can tell when a child has not been raised with love. You can tell.
I think, yeah, I mean, I think it would actually be harder to raise kids in the more conventional way that people do today, with that prince or princess persona that gets pushed onto to them, and I don't know,
Entitlement.
yeah, and I mean, it's just easier to put them out in nature and let them be nature loving beings like they are meant to be. And it's just insane if we were to step back and objectively look at how we're behaving as human animals. I mean, it would be, maybe everybody would draw the same conclusion, but I'm not sure. It's insane. I mean, mothers don't even have to take part in raising their children anymore. I mean, there's wealthy people who hire surrogates to carry their child so that they don't have to even have that responsibility. I mean, they're totally denying their own humanity.
Yeah, that's a misunderstanding of what a human being is. The emphasis in the last 150 years with so-called social Darwinism, blaming Darwin, but it's not Darwin,
Right.
on genes, and natural selection, survival of the fittest. All that's fake.
Mm-hmm.
That's fake news.
Right.
But that's what people think. Oh, it's just genes. There's not, the child's born, they have genes, nothing much you can do with them. Just, help them grow up, keep them fed and dry, and they'll be, you get through that babyhood. Not understanding how the parent and other caregivers are shaping who that baby becomes, their
Mm-hmm.
personality, their capacities, their ability to be a member of the community, all being
Mm-hmm.
shaped by those early experiences. And so there's this massive misunderstanding. Colin Turnbull, in his book, The Human Cycle, contrasts his own upbringing in Britain with nannies
Mm.
and with Mbuti, who he studied in Africa, and how different it was when he got to adolescence. He felt pretty empty and like he had depressed essentially because he had nothing to offer, and he was bullied then into being aggressive because that's you got to do that for the team. Whereas the Mbuti, when they reach adolescence, they're full of life. They've got their emotion systems, perceptions all well tuned up, and they fit in, and they know how to enjoy life, and they know how to do the kinds of things that need to be done day to day. And it's just so different. And we're raising kids now, and we send them to daycare
To raise them
with
for you.
people, right, or TV.
But just to be clear, that's not to blame the parents. I mean, it's the system. I mean, it's
That's right.
systemic. They
Yes,
don't have a choice.
that's right. So we and in the United States, there's no paid parental leave, although a little bit now for federal workers was just passed recently, 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
But still, I mean, other countries, advanced economic nations, have at least a year of paid leave so parents can bond with the baby and breastfeed. And, we have none of that. So it's like crisis mode all the time in
All the
the
time.
USA these days for regular families and for babies and kids in general. It's a really horrible place to raise children.
Yeah, it is. Actually, I got an interesting comment on our last discussion from a Native American. He said it was clear to him that Western culture raises psychotic children, and that when
Yeah,
he
that's right.
was first forced to spend time with these traditionally raised kids, he realized like immediately that they acted insane, that there was something wrong about them, that they were insane. He even said that the council meetings would come to this same conclusion. So, and to be honest, I feel this way, and I've felt this way for a long time. I mean, I truly feel it is insane the way we regard
Yeah.
nature and wildlife, and how we're destroying nature by doing things we think we're entitled to, and the way we're raising children to buy into all these things that we don't need, and that no one seems to care. But I mean, I know people care, but it's something that you know we can't seem to stop doing as human beings. It's crazy.
Right. So you're right.
What makes me feel even worse is that I know these concerns are based in sound
You are
evidence.
the sane one, and everything around you is
Yeah, I
insane.
mean, it's
Yeah.
not something like I'm just making up, you
Yeah.
know. I mean, it's really happening and in
Yeah.
real time.
I just read recently a quote. I don't remember where it was from, but who said it? I mean, but that when we disrupt the ecologies in the natural world, we are making them insane. So
I can see that.
when we pollute the lake or the soil, we are causing an insanity in that system. And so we've done that to human beings for quite a while now in the Western world.
Yeah, I mean, just what we surround ourselves with in our world, the very unnatural things. I did I did an interview with a psychologist who conducted several neurological studies specifically on children and adolescents, on how living in very non-natural environments affects the functionality of our brains, and how to live in such places
You
really,
mean urban environment?
Yep, and how living in such places really causes the brain to struggle a lot. And so we're overwhelmed all the time with these hormones of stress,
Yep.
and really fuels these abnormal
Yeah.
behaviors.
Imagine the difference in intelligence between two babies. One baby's raised in a house pretty much all the
Mm-hmm.
time, and they spend their time in four walls, maybe a crib, for four sides, and or maybe they have a lot of animals and toys, but these are all dead things,
Mm-hmm.
inanimate things, at
Mm-hmm.
least. And compare that to a child who spends their life outside in the natural world. Everything is alive, and so you have a whole different sensibilities of kinds of intelligence that grow when you realize the tree is alive, and if I do this or that, it will react this way, or that animal's coming this way today and flying by that way. And oh, it's so enormously different. So how can you,
Oh, I know. I mean, you can
again,
see.
that's the unnestedness.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
can see it. You can see it for sure. So, Dr. Narvaez, I know you kind of already answered this, but what kind of advice do you have for us all that live in this crazy world of broken and unsustainable worldviews? I'm not sure if that's the appropriate question to ask, but yeah.
How do we stay sane in an insane world?
Yes.
Well, you got to find like-minded people and hang out with
Mm-hmm.
them, talk to them, read their books or their blogs, listen to their videos, their audios, and find ways to feel connected to people who have awarenesses that you're developing or you have developed. And then find ways to express your sadness, but also your other feelings. I mean, we are alive now. The earth is beautiful. We have relationships now, and to express gratitude in different ways for those relationships, to appreciate all that is in your present moment, whatever that is. Find the life around you and bless it and feel its blessing towards you, that it's encouraging you to stay strong through this period of transition. I think we're actually moving in, the Hopis say this is the fourth world that we're kind of messing up, and
Hmm.
we've messed up so many before. So I think we're preparing for the fifth world, whatever that is. And it's a lot of mystery, right? We don't know. But our duty is to clear our egos out of the way and let those divine energies, those universal energies of spirit, touch us and guide our uniqueness, our path to doing what we can to promote life. And so every day to not get caught up in, oh no, I'm scared, I'm this or that, and let the feelings go by like on little boats, and they travel by. This is a Buddhist practice kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Mm-hmm.
to try to be aware of where you are now and what life is there that you can enhance.
Thank you, Darcia. Thank you so much. So lastly, are there any new nature experiences or connections that you would like to share today?
Yes, I was in the kitchen cleaning up a few days ago, and all of a sudden there was a spider right there on the counter. And I said, "Oh my God, hello, hello! It's so good to see you." Because I always welcome spiders. And I said, "Well, you better go hide somewhere because this is not a good place to hang out." But thank you for your presence. So I was so thrilled to see a spider in the house.
This is incredible because just this morning, Darcia, I found a spider in the cup that I was going to use to make tea.
Wow.
And it had started, yeah, it had already started making a web in the cup. And I was thinking, oh no, you can't live here. You're not, this is not a good place to live. I had 2 back-to-back spider encounters before this interview.
Wow. Oh,
Wow.
wonderful.
Definitely kindred spirits at play here.
There is, yeah.
Darcia, thank you so much. And as always, I just truly love the work that you do. And thank you again for taking the time to speak with me.
Yeah, thank you so much. Great to talk with you. Great to see you before, and best wishes on your work.
The insanity that may be felt by some in the world today may be a direct cause of the patterns of human-induced destruction. A psychologist named Jerome Bernstein has described how deeper, more damaging psychological traumas could result as a consequence of amoral human behavior, and that quite possibly we are experiencing a sort of collective mourning for the profound assaults on nature. Yet modern life may be desensitizing our ability to recognize and address this. Darcia's book, titled Indigenous Sustainable Wisdom, First Nation Know-How for Global Flourishing, is a collaborative effort to describe how nature-based indigenous knowledge is vital to our ability to thrive as part of this greater ecosystem of life. As Darcia explained, it is what we embody that defines who we are. That embodiment can either be of destruction and disregard, or a kind of kindred spiritedness that is capable of feeling the world's and each other's needs. To live without that misguided sense of separation, which causes so much trauma in our lives and to the natural world. That, I think, is closer to what and who we really are. This is Wild Roots. Thanks for listening.